Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF, and Hebrew name is Bitronistim. IDSF is the leading Israeli organization advocating for strong national security to defend Israel. Thank you so much to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning into this briefing and our previous briefings to allow us to bring you behind the headlines what is really happening here in Israel. Many of our viewers tune in our live Zoom briefings. Many others tune in on YouTube. It's great to have all of you present, sharing your questions, allowing us to really bring to you what is most relevant and pertinent in this war. Today's briefing, I sat down with Martin Sherman. Martin is an expert on many things related to Israel's national security. He is the founder of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies, and he is a senior researcher at IDSF. Many of you know we have a very robust research department here at IDSF. He is part of that. He recently published an article that we'll share in the chat about the relevance of the Indian Ocean in terms of what is happening in the Middle East and Israel's national security profile. So we spoke a little bit about that, as well as his general views on what is happening in this war in Gaza. It's always good to hear his opinions. Certainly gives us something to think about. Martin, thank you so much for joining me today to share your expertise on what is happening right now in Israel. Really appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it too.
Absolutely. So let's begin with you just sharing with us your thoughts on this war. What is Israel doing right? What is Israel not doing right? And where do you see this war going right now?
Well, to be honest, I think apart from tactical successes on the battlefield, which have been quite impressive, Israel has done most things wrong. It's a little bit of hindsight now, but many people now realize that we should have staged the attack differently. Instead of going from north to south, we should have gone from east to west and taken the Philadelphia corridor at the beginning. In many ways, I think we're now paying the price of 4 decades of dereliction of diplomatic duty, because for decades Israel has basically abandoned the field of public diplomacy. It's let its image become very degraded, and therefore has limited its freedom of movement on the battlefield. I believe that public diplomacy is an integral part of Israel's strategic arsenal, and it's much like the Air Force. It sort of generates the freedom of movement for decision makers to make decisions on the ground and to pursue national interests. And if you're completely constrained by diplomatic enmity, you can't bring your military powers to full expression. I think that I'm saying this now, and this is not as a matter of hindsight. I'm saying this after decades of pleading that Israel should invest something like 1 or 2% of its state budget in public diplomacy. Now, just to give you an order of magnitude, 1 to 2% of Israel's state budget is anywhere up to over $2 billion. And with $2 billion, you can you can actually change a lot of people's minds and win a lot of people's hearts. And if you look at the United States now, it's almost incredible that Biden would want to appease the Muslim majority there, because if you look at public opinion in the United States, Israel has a massive advantage over the Palestinians, and logically it should be political suicide for any American president to go against Israel. But we haven't levered that. And so I think one of our greatest mistakes before starting the war was abandoning the battle for hearts and minds.
Okay, I want to speak about both of these issues, the tactical issues in Gaza and then the public diplomacy. But let's start first with the Gaza issue. You said that it would have been better for the army to proceed from east to west rather than from north to south. Are you able to elaborate on that a little bit? Meaning what failings, what data is there to suggest that that would have been a better strategic move?
Well, underlying that, there's an assumption. I think it's more than an assumption. Is that the public in Gaza is not the hapless victim of its extremist leadership. It's not. It's basically the crucible in which that leadership was formed and the incubator from which it emerged. So, I'm basically unmoved by the claim of collateral damage, because if we saw the joy and the celebration of the average Gazan in the street when they brought in the hostages, I found it really difficult to feel any great empathy for a public like that. So that's the first thing. The reasoning behind the north to south was that it would give the civilian population time to be evacuated. And I really don't think that the fate of the civilian population should be a strategic calculation in Israel, which is why I said before we should have primed public opinion for whatever we're going to do, because unfortunately, Israeli public diplomacy has been event focused. If something happens, you run after the people and try to explain it. It shouldn't be that. It should be an ongoing effort to create context, and the context against which events are interpreted. Let me give you an example. Let's suppose a Palestinian child is accidentally killed. It makes a big difference if Israel is portrayed as a valiant democracy fighting for enlightened values in a sea of dictatorship. Or, on the other hand, if Israel is a semi-fascist state that's coveting the territory of others. Same event, different context. And I think Israel should have been spending huge amounts of resources to create that context. And once that hasn't been done, action on the ground becomes very difficult. You asked about north to south, because then there would have been no refuge, or much less refuge, for the leadership of the terrorist groups of Hamas. They had time to move from the battlegrounds of the north to the relative safety of the south, and time to move the hostages, etc., etc. This way, I think you could have cut off many of their routes to escape and to hide the hostages. I think it just seems to me that basically that's the weak point of Gaza. It's long and narrow. So why attack them on the long dimension when you could attack them on the narrow dimension? It doesn't make that much sense. And I admit that some of this is, for me, is a little bit of wisdom in hindsight. But I'm not paid to make those strategic decisions. Other people are.
So, had they attacked the way you're proposing, there would have, in theory, been much higher rates of civilian casualties. And I understand what you're saying about the crucible of Gaza and what truly is a civilian. But then going back to your other issue of the public diplomacy, would it have been a much harder battle to fight on the level of public diplomacy if the civilian casualty rates were exponentially higher as a result of that change of operations?
Well, there are two aspects of that. The first one is that the faster you do things, the less chance world opinion has to react. If we'd have finished it within a month or two, when world opinion was far more on Israel's side than it is today, that's would have been an advantage. The second thing, world opinion today is a product of what we haven't been doing for decades. So you have these two aspects. The one was the benefit of speedy action, and the other is trying to make up for the debacle of decades.
Right. Okay. And then going back to that public diplomacy, it's a very sharp point that Israel just has not invested the dollars, the shekels, in its public diplomacy program. Do you know where that money went instead? Did that go to the defense budget? Did that go to parks and recreation? How was that money spent?
Well, I'm not
Instead?
sure. I'm not sure that there was a one-to-one trade-off. I think in many ways, public diplomacy wasn't considered that important because if you look about how it's been treated, I think we discussed it in one of our previous discussion. Public diplomacy has been divided up into different ministries, small ministries, temporary ministries. If someone gets the defense portfolio, you don't take the Air Force out of it and give it to someone else as a prize for joining the coalition. But here you had the Ministry of Diaspora, the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, the Minister of Foreign Ministry, the Ministry of Public Diplomacy. There were about 4 different ministries that got small budgets to do a very important job. And I think basically that conveys that Israeli leadership didn't consider public diplomacy an important strategic component in waging the battle for Israel's existence in this very tough environment.
Many people in the world of public diplomacy for Israel would argue that they are doing their utmost, but they're outnumbered just population across the world of those who hate Israel. And therefore, shekel for shekel, whatever Israel spends and however much it promotes Israel's needs, it's always a losing battle, so to speak, in the world of public opinion. How would you
Well,
respond to that?
I think that's an argument for surrender. I think that then why do anything if you can't win? And as I'm going to say, I think the whole issue has been badly structured. It should be an ongoing battle that you don't spend now. Now you should be reaping the benefits of what you've been investing over the years. I mean, we've totally ignored the universities. We've let the university, even young evangelicals in America are not as pro-Israel as their elders. So I don't think that's a valid argument. I think what you're doing is reaping the results of not waging a war with sufficient awareness of its importance and sufficient resources. I mean, when I say $1 billion or $1.5 billion or $2 billion, people recoil in horror. But basically, it's peanut money for Israel. Israel's state budget is much more than that. As I said, it's a fraction of percentages. So it's I might be able to accept that argument if we'd invested the resources and they hadn't worked, but we haven't invested them. And say envisaged failure is not an excuse for not spending them. So I'm very unsympathetic towards that argument. And I can speak from my own experience, limited experience. I once gave a lecture in a synagogue in Hollywood where the rabbi was J Street. And when I finished the lecture, he said, "This is very interesting. We haven't heard this stuff before. Can you give me the presentation that you showed?" So I really don't believe. I just believe that Israel hasn't been assertive enough in expressing its case. And also, in many cases, we had for years we haven't shown the good side of Israel. The restaurants, the beaches, the architecture, etc., etc. But the onslaught against Israel isn't because people think that Israel have got lousy restaurants or because their women are ugly or because their beaches are not attractive. It's a little like someone who's been accused of murder, rape, and arson. And in his defense, he says, I married a beautiful woman, I like classical music, and I'm good at science. The responses don't address the allegation, the accusations.
Thank you, Martin. Let's move on to another topic. You recently published an article about the strategic value of the Indian Ocean and Israel's interests there. Are you able to share a little bit about that with our viewers? And we'll make sure, of course, to share that article with everyone who tunes into this briefing. But just to explain to us why in the midst of a war in Gaza and an escalation up in Lebanon, we need to consider what's happening in the waters.
Well, the easy answer for that is Iran and the Houthis. But that's the Houthis are just recent development. But for years, I've been preaching for strategic collaboration between India and Israel. I think I wrote my first article in 1992, talking about Indo-Israeli cooperation as a U.S. national interest, which of course is always easier when a Republican president is in power than when you have a Democrat in power, especially in the case of Obama. But India, of course, is a huge strategic power growing. It will probably soon be third or fourth size as economy. And I think we have a vested interest in developing a relationship with India. And we both have a vested interest in seeing that the Indian Ocean doesn't become a hotbed of extremism, piracy, and terrorism. Both in principle, status quo countries who believe in evolution rather than revolution. We have a lot of common values, and now I think it's become even more clear with the issue of Iran, Israel's need for submarines. I think in hindsight, the argument over submarines is a little silly, because if you have to make a mistake, assuming that you can't always exactly predict the future, if you're going to make an error, I'd rather err on having one submarine too many rather than one submarine too little. The growing strategic importance of the Israeli Navy is something that is not always commented on, but the most expensive weapon systems in the IDF are now with the Navy, with the submarines, which are several times more expensive than the most expensive plane that the Israeli Air Force has. So the maritime sphere is becoming extremely important, and with the growing importance of the East as a center of commerce and industry, and Israel's growing interaction with the East, I think keeping the Indian Ocean free of hostile elements is an imperative.
And can you just elaborate a little bit about the relationship that India has with Iran and the extent to which the Israel-India relationship can be strengthened to build a defense against Iran?
Well, they have a traditional relationship with Iran, which I agree is a little troubling. And also they have a lot of dependence on Iran because of the energy. Perhaps there's some ways that we can find to diversify India's oil imports, but this is a serious problem. Again, I think this is should be one of the major issues on our public diplomacy offensive, to explain how Iran is not precisely an ideal strategic partner for India, and India has very large Muslim population. So far, they have not been radicalized, but that's something we will have to keep our eye on as well. But the Indians, especially the current party, the BJP, has had a long and traditional affiliation with Israel. We saw when Prime Minister Modi was here, the relationship between him and Netanyahu was very close, very warm. And I certainly think that's something we have to foster. And I agree with you, one of the few clouds on the Israeli-Indian horizon is the issue of Iran. And that's something that must be dealt with. The only way I can see of really being effectively dealt with is on a diplomatic level, and trying to diversify India's energy imports. By the way, in many ways, India has a certain amount of dependence on Israel as well. Israel is among the 2 or 3 top arms suppliers for India, and in some years we've even been the greatest. There've been huge contracts with India, including I don't know if you remember back in I think it was in the 90s, Israel signed a contract with China to supply them an air surveillance system, and the Americans banned it. But they didn't ban selling to India, and India basically bought that. And there've been billion-dollar transactions between the two countries, and so India has a vested interest in India in Israel being safe, secure, and prosperous, so you can keep supplying it with arms that it doesn't get anywhere else.
And as far as you're aware, is Israel making active overtures to build this relationship with India? Meaning, you make a strong claim in your article, but is it happening right now?
Oh, well, it depends. If you look at the point of departure back in the 90s, when there was a very cold relationship between Israel and India, things have improved tremendously from almost no commerce at all. We're over $10 billion today. Of course, a lot of that has been fueled by the decline of the Soviet Union, because India basically was aligned more with the Soviet Union and with America. But India, once it realized the Soviet Union was declining, and you saw, by the way, that the Arabs always sided with Pakistan in any dispute between them, decided it was time to jump ship. And I think there's been great progress. It was former Minister Yuval Steinitz who said that Israel sees India only second to the United States in its importance. So there does seem to be an awareness. I believe that everything can be improved. But India is certainly on Israel's screen.
Martin, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate learning from you. Do you have any final thoughts you want to share with our viewers about India, about Israel, about Iran, Russia, China? The floor is yours for some parting words.
Well, yes, I think that our relationship with India is very important. But if I can just go back to our first topic with Gaza, I think the cruel dilemma facing Israel, and I've probably said this before in one of your interviews, is today that Israel is facing a situation where, in the long run, there will either be Arabs in Gaza or Jews in the Negev, but there won't be both. And I think that's the biggest diplomatic challenge that Israel faces today, is bringing that home to world opinion, and particularly to world Jewry, so that they can be enlisted in the fight for public opinion.
That was my interview earlier today with Martin Sherman, who is the founder of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies and is also a senior researcher here at IDSF. It was great to speak with him, to hear his opinions, and I'm going to make sure to send that article out in just a few moments. And this is, of course, a nice opportunity to remind everyone to make sure to join our mailing list at IDSF, where we send out these articles all of the time. You can therefore keep up to date with all of the research that we are doing here. With that, I will end the briefing for today. We will be back with you tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. here in Israel. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Take care, everyone.